Hi, this is Craig Stocks here at Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And today's video, I hope, will be a little bit shorter. I'm going to focus on really just one aspect of editing astro images in Photoshop, and that's trying to get a good starting point for your SHO or Hubble palette color balance. So we'll jump into Photoshop and take a look at that. Today we're going to be working with data from the Eagle Nebula, and this is data that I captured I think a couple weeks ago. I've already processed everything in PixInsight, and I've created the 4 basic files that I need, and that's a starless sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen, so those 3 files, and then a color stars image. And for the stars, since all I shot was SHO data, I used HOO for stars. So to load everything, we'll go to File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and that will bring up this dialog box where we can browse for the files that we need, and those are going to be on the D drive, in my DreamScope. Find the right folder here. And normally I just keep things sorted in date sequence. So there's the files, and I also am loading the HOO that I extracted the stars from. So we'll have 5 files in total: the 3 monochrome narrowband, the color stars, and then the HOO color image that I used for the stars. And so the first thing I want to do is rotate this image 180 degrees just so that it doesn't look disoriented to me. Now, got some housekeeping I need to do here, and I always put the layers over in the right hand side in the layers palette, and I'll always put them in the same order. Some of the order is important, some is not. Somewhat important, I'll take the HOO image and put it at the bottom, and I know that's the HOO image 2 ways. One is by the file name. Also, by the thumbnail, I can see that this is a color image of the background. This is the HOO stars. I'm going to put those at the very top, and I want to put each one of these into a layer group so that the adjustments will stay constrained within the group and just apply to that one layer. So I'm going to put this layer into a group with Control-G, change the name to stars, and the stars we want in screen blending mode. In case you missed it, my video just before this was focused just on blending mode, so you might want to go back and check that out if these blending modes seem unusual to you. So I'll just turn this layer group off and go ahead and collapse it with a little disclosure triangle there. Now, I always put my narrowband images in the same order. The order doesn't matter, other than I just get used to having them in a certain order. So I always put hydrogen on top, oxygen in the middle, and then sulfur at the bottom. And I've just been working with that order for years, and so I know kind of just by position where to find each one of them. And I want to put each one of these into a layer group. So there's a layer group. This is hydrogen. And next one down is oxygen. And the next one down is sulfur. And the last one at the bottom is the HOO. And a lot of times I will use this, an HOO or an RGB image like this, as a background. And in fact, if we wanted to color balance this, we could. It looks like it's got a lot of color cast in the black areas. So let's start with our color balancing with this image. Regardless of everything else, I know I want the darkest areas to be a neutral, very dark gray with no color cast. So I'm going to do 2 things. First, I want to find the darkest area, and there's a couple ways you could do that. if you use a levels or a curves, I could put a levels adjustment layer here, and I'm just grabbing that from this adjustments panel. If I hold the alternate key, and that would be Option on a Mac, and slide the blacks slider in, at some point you'll see things starting to clip. So there's the red clipping, and eventually when all of the layers clip, it turns to black. And what I want to do is find the first significant area that clips to black. But the problem is when I let go to put a color sample there, I lose my reference. So I want something that gives me this visual reference, but something that stays there. So to do that, we're going to add a solid fill layer, and this is going to be just a pure black layer, and I'm going to put it in divide blending mode, and now everything turns white. Now, and notice that that's right above this levels adjustment layer, and right now this layer group is the only thing active or turned on, so this is all I'm seeing. So now if I come back to the layers adjustment level, and now I'm not holding the alternate key, but I'm sliding this black slider to the right, which makes things darker. And again, we can start to sneak up on this area right here. But now, notice when I remove my focus from the levels adjustment layer, because I'm using this combination of two adjustment layers, it stays put. Now I can come over to the tools, grab the eyedropper tool, zoom in, and this looks like the black either here, or possibly down here. I think I'm going to choose this area and choose that as my black reference. Now I can turn off this solid fill layer, and we'll come back to the levels adjustment layer and just use the reset icon to reset this. So that's our blackest point. We now have a color sampler, and when I placed that color sampler, it automatically opened up the info palette. So now, for this to be a neutral color with no color cast, the red, green, and blue values should be equal. And if we look at the values here, you can see that they're not. The red is 27, green is 56, blue is 57. And there's two numbers. The number on the left is before applying this adjustment, and the one on the right is after. And what we want to do is make these numbers on the right all equal, so the same value. And I'm going to choose something around an RGB level of 20. So I want to work through color by color. So right now, if we look at the focus, we're adjusting RGB simultaneously, but I can drop this down and choose just the red channel. And now when I slide the black slider in, you'll notice that it's only the 27 right here. In fact, the one on the right is the only thing that's going to change. Don't be fooled by the number over here in the levels adjustment layer. This is not the one you want to watch. It's the one over here in the info palette. So if I move that to the right until we get a value of 20, there we go. Now I'll do the same thing with green, and it'll have to move quite a bit further, but we'll take it over to a value of 20. And the choice of 20 is somewhat arbitrary. Sometimes I use 19, sometimes I'll use 24 or 25. It just depends on whether I feel like this is truly going to be a black point, or if it's just a good dark gray. So now we have 20, 20, 20, and we've achieved a more neutral black point. And you'll notice right away that makes this whole image pop quite a bit more. And I can turn this layer off and on. That was before. So we've added contrast by darkening the darks, and that's what contrast is. It's the difference between how dark are the darks and how light are the lights. We've made the darks darker, so we've added contrast or punch to the image. I don't need this solid fill layer, so I'm just going to drag it down to the trash can to get rid of it, and I'm going to rename this adjustment layer black point. So there's our HOO image. And for the time being, I'm going to turn this layer group off because I want to now focus on each one of the narrowband images. And the goal here is to get a good starting point for color. I find a lot of times that some targets just kind of fall into place easily. Others you have to finesse and fight a little bit to get there. So I don't know which way this one's going to be, but we're going to start by doing somewhat the same thing that we did with the HOO, only we're going to do this by eye because color's not involved. So let's turn on our sulfur layer. And again, I want to add a levels adjustment layer. And what I'm looking at is the dark areas, and I want the dark areas to be dark and the light areas to be light. And if I look at the histogram, you can see that there's a fair amount of space from the black point to where the data starts, and then a little bit more room until we start having a significant amount of data. So I'm going to start by moving this black point over so that we get our black areas almost black. And then the white, I want to bring this white slider over to where the data is just beginning. And so what we've done now is we've added a little bit of contrast to our sulfur, which is going to wind up being red. So for now, I'm going to just turn that off, and let's do the same thing with our oxygen. So we'll add a levels adjustment layer within the oxygen group. And again, I'm going to darken the darks, and the whites look like they're already pretty close to white. So that's good to go. And now we'll do the same thing with hydrogen. Again, inside the group, add a levels adjustment layer, darken the darks, brighten the whites. So now we're using the full tonal range of each one of the narrowband filters. And that seems to be an important first step. If you're using the full range of black to white, or pretty much that full range, then generally you get I'll say a usable color balance just from the beginning. Now, so far we don't have any color, and we want this to be color mapped to SHO. So we want sulfur to be red, oxygen to be blue, and hydrogen to be green. So let's start with the sulfur, and I'm going to turn this layer group on. I'll expand the group, go inside the group, and above the levels, now I'm going to add a hue saturation. And I want to put this hue saturation adjustment layer in colorized blending mode. By default, it starts at red, which is perfect for sulfur. I want to make the lightness minus 50%. And you can just slide it over until you get minus 50 here in the value. And then the saturation we want to be 100%. Now I'll just turn this layer group off. We'll go to the oxygen and do the same thing. We'll add a hue saturation, put it in colorized blending mode. We want minus 50% for the lightness, 100% for saturation, and this we want to be blue. So I'm going to move it over to 240, which is the hue rotation angle for pure blue. And now we'll just do the same thing with our hydrogen, which is going to be green. So again, we'll add a hue saturation, colorize blending mode, minus 50 for the lightness. And that minus 50 is somewhat important because that's the same as actually moving things around from channel to channel. So it gives you not too bright, not too dark. It just kind of falls into place where it should. In this, we want to move up to 120 for the rotation angle to be a pure green. So now there's our green. If I turn on oxygen and sulfur, you'll notice nothing happens. And that's because each one of these layer groups is in its default pass-through blending mode. So we need to change the blending mode on each one of these layer groups from pass-through to screen. So there's our hydrogen, there's our oxygen, and here's our sulfur. And you can see right away we've got a fairly decent color balance just by adjusting the brightness and contrast first of each one of those layers and then adding the color. And it was that step of fine-tuning that levels in each one of the groups that really did the work of getting us to a good starting point. Now, I generally like to have the red more dominant, and red we know is coming from sulfur. So now we're getting into color balancing for artistic appeal rather than just pure red, green, blue. So to turn up the red, I'm going to come down to this levels adjustment layer in the sulfur layer group. And remember, sulfur is color mapped as red. So if I make the red brighter, the red will become more dominant in the image. And I can do that by moving the midpoint slider. Remember, we've already set the bright point and the black point. So it's the midpoint slider that we primarily want to move. And as I move that to the left, you'll see that we're brightening the reds. Now, some of that is going to bleed into the black areas. So typically, when you move the midpoint slider to the left, you may have to come back and compensate by moving the black point slider in a little bit to keep that neutral color in the background. And it becomes just a little bit of a trial and error dance, finding just the right balance. And then I think I'll do the same thing with the oxygen. I think I'll turn it up, brighten it a little bit. And again, we start getting some blue bleeding into the background. And that's not as dramatic as the first image I showed, but it's certainly not a bad image. Nice natural colors. I might drive the reds up a little bit more at this point. And again, typically have to adjust the blacks when you do that. And once you get a fairly decent balance, at this point then I would start using global adjustment layers. Now, the last thing I might do before I do that is we've got this HOO layer at the bottom, and let me just collapse these layer groups. We've got the HOO layer at the bottom, which if you remember is very red because it's really dominated by hydrogen. But if I leave it turned on and turn the narrowband layers back on, it gives us a lot of red overall because we're now putting this color image on top of a very red background. But I can add another levels adjustment and tone down this HOO background, and that gives us more of a red color. It doesn't do this core any favor, so this is where we might use a mask. The center part, the core, really looks better without the HOO background. The rest of it might look better with the background. If we want to use the background everywhere but in the core, then I would go to the HOO layer group level, and using this icon that looks like a front-loading washer, we can click on that and that'll add a layer mask, and the layer mask is white. I'll grab my brush tool by tapping the B key. I'll tap D for my default colors, X to move black to the foreground, and I want 100% opacity, so I'm going to tap the 1 key. And that will give me, the 0 key will give me 100%. The 1 key gives me 10%. I can use the right bracket key to make that brush bigger and just position it over the core and give it a click and maybe give it another click and wiggle it around a little bit. So now we have hidden this HOO layer in the core, but we're still letting it have a presence in the rest of the background. And that just helps bring out more of that red. And if you like it better without, just turn it off. So that's just looking at it with and without. I do think I like it better without, so I'll just leave that turned off for now. I'm going to go above the hydrogen and below the stars. I'm going to add my typical layers for global adjustments, and that's going to be first a levels adjustment layer, then a color balance, then a hue saturation, and lastly I'm going to add a solid fill layer, so a solid color, and I want this to be RGB values of 19, 19, 19. And there we go. Now you can also get that by just typing 13, 13, 13 into this hexadecimal field. Click OK, and then we'll put this in lighten blending mode. And that just lightens anything that is darker than that to a nice solid neutral, very dark color. And if I turn it on and off, you can see it's not having much effect, and we don't want it to have much effect. We want it to just affect those darkest areas. And now I can make any global adjustments to brightness and contrast. If I want to adjust the color, I can fine-tune the color with the color adjustment here. If we want to adjust saturation, we can adjust the global saturation to add more color. If I want to adjust, for instance, just the reds, I can choose the red from the samples here, and I can adjust just the saturation of the red. I can also adjust the hue of just the reds. So for instance, if you want to make the reds a little bit more of a blood red, you could do that. Maybe adjust the saturation. I don't normally adjust lightness, but sometimes it's a nice adjustment. And the last thing we'll want to do typically is to turn the stars back on. So we'll come up to the stars layer and just turn that on. And now we have stars and a fairly finished image. So that covered what I wanted to really focus on, and that was, before we got too far into it, going to each one of these layers and adjusting the levels for each narrowband filter so that we were using the full range of tones. So let's turn off everything except, for instance, the sulfur. And if I turn off the hue saturation layer, this is what it looks like in grayscale. And what we did was use this levels adjustment layer to fine tune, to make sure we're using the full range of each one of those colors. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or thoughts for other videos you'd like to see me focus on, drop those down in the comments below. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.